Ted Cruz appears on this show often. My other senator, John Cornyn, doesn't show much interest in coming onto this conservatives program. Today, I met up with Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas. He sits on the Senate Homeland Security Committee and is also a physician. Naturally, my first question was, what are you doing in Texas? Here's how the rest of the conversation went.
You know, believe it or not, Dallas, Texas is on the way to Wichita, Kansas from Washington, D.C. There is no direct flight from Wichita to D.C., so we commonly stop here. We have several big healthcare issues going on back at Capitol Hill. One of them is the no surprise billing issue, and I don't want to bore everybody with that, but Texas is in the heart of that. This is a situation where maybe you go to the emergency room and you see a doctor, you have some lab work done, and you find out they're not in network. So we're trying to sort out, you know, how that out-of-pocket responsibility is for somebody. And then the other big issue that we're working on, believe it or not, I'm working with Bernie Sanders on the cost of prescription drugs.
Hold on a minute. I got to stop you there. You're working with a declared socialist, communist on prescription drug costs.
You got it.
Okay, so tell me.
Yeah, so I think certainly Bernie respects me and I respect him. He wants to drive down the cost of drugs by the government just saying, here the price is. I want to drive it down by increasing competition. I want to make it easier for generics and biosimilars to get to market. But you know who's doing a great job in this area is one of your own, Mark Cuban. Yeah. So I want to sit down with Mark this afternoon and his team and say, what does your solution look like? Look, last year alone, these pharmacy benefit managers made some $11 billion on Medicare prescription drugs.
Right. But, well, what about this dynamic that you've got prescription drugs that are sold in other countries, the same drug, at less expensively, but here in America, these pharmaceutical companies just jack up the price because we can afford it. What about leveling the playing field in that regard?
You know, absolutely. So let's talk about why. That's what people need to dive into and understand why. So let's say we're selling this particular drug in India. What India says is if you don't give us a reduced amount on this, we're just going to cheat. We're going to copy your intellectual property and do this ourselves. But also keep this in mind. Europe probably approves about 50% of the new drugs, these miracle drugs that we see. CAR T-cell therapy is one of the great new drugs for lymphoma that we've approved in the past 2 years, but they'll keep a lot of those drugs off the market, so they don't have access to everything that we have. Certainly, we want a level playing field, but it's the intellectual property that's important, and we got to make sure these countries quit stealing our intellectual property.
Not a bad idea. You know, I was in a conversation with a fellow doctor of somebody I'm sure you're aware of who he is, Dr. Malone.
Of course.
He let me know about an investigator in your office who has discovered that Dr. Anthony Fauci, one of the most controversial figures in medicine in the United States, and dare I say around the globe, he is now back at work in some capacity in the federal government. He's got a staff that's being paid for with taxpayer money, but we're having a hard time, and your investigator's having a hard time figuring out what he's been hired to do, why he's there, and why he's getting paid. What is Dr. Fauci doing being employed anywhere in this government?
That's a great question. The good news is I think he'll be easier to subpoena if he's, and I can't wait for Jim Jordan to get a hold of him again. We've given Jim and Brad Wistrom so much more information about what's really been happening here behind the scenes. I think now that we can show beyond a shadow, well, we can show with the preponderance of evidence that there were 2 unintentional lab leaks in Wuhan, China, and Dr. Fauci has been funding gain-of-function research for probably 2 decades. So not only was this virus leaked from a laboratory there, most likely it was made there, and again with American taxpayer dollars, and we're still funding it. Yep. So we need to hold Dr. Fauci accountable. We need to hold China accountable as well.
And don't forget, Elise Stefanik had former DNI Ratcliffe in testimony basically asking him, do you believe that Dr. Fauci, with the available evidence at the time, that he lied to Congress under oath, which the DNI said, he did lie. All right, let's get
one exclamation point. Even the NIH themselves have said that Dr. Fauci was funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China. A report in August of 2022 timeframe. We've got that report. It's in the report that we released out. By the way, folks can go to marshall.senate.gov and they can see that report, basically agreeing with everything that Ratcliffe said as well, but it's giving him even more support.
Okay, let's. You mentioned Jordan and the oversight the House is conducting right now. Let me go through a couple of things here. Whistleblower wants to reveal that there were false statements under oath. There was government abuse inside the Internal Revenue Service, covering up for this investigation into Hunter Biden and what he has been doing. All these red flags Treasury has been keeping under wraps. Plus, you've got, speaking of Treasury, you've got 9 Bidens implicated in some very shady dealings from money coming overseas into their bank accounts. Yet Treasury will not release that information, but members of Congress are allowed to go sit down inside of Treasury and have it presented to them. Sir, when you hear about all these stories and how much of a struggle it is to get information out about what Democrats have been doing in government, frustrating, and how do you break through that logjam?
Well, this is why Americans have lost confidence in their government. This is why Americans have less patriotism than ever before. So growing up, my dad was the chief of police in my hometown for some 25 years. And he always talked about equal application of the law. Typically, an officer would call him or some wealthy person in town would call him. And I could just hear my dad say, I don't care what this young man's last name is. I don't care who his dad is. I don't care where he lives. If he was a DUI, then he was a DUI. And my dad was just a stickler. In my dad's world, there was right and there was wrong, that he represented the law and he was going to apply it equally. And what America has seen for, you tell me how long, 10 or 20 years, is the law is not being applied equally. So the IRS goes after Christian organizations, nonprofit organizations like we would fund, going after Catholics, trying to kick priests out of our own veterans hospitals, if you can imagine right now. So it is unequal application of the law. This is why we've lost confidence. This is why Jim Jordan's in the right place. God has called him to be right where he is. He's going to do a great job. And so is Jamie Comer. He's doing a great job there as well.
Yeah, one more thing, because I'm going someplace with this. Testimony revealing that Antony Blinken and the Biden campaign, they actually set up those so-called 50 intelligence officials, which, by the way, are disgraced now. Some of them still have security clearance, set up that letter that said that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. It was all a campaign setup, and they rolled it out as organic. If some of those men on that letter still have security clearance, shouldn't they be revoked immediately? Shouldn't their security clearances be revoked immediately?
You know, absolutely. So I think what they did is certainly it's disrespectful. It's not honest. It's below the levels of integrity what they did.
Sure.
A very active cover up by that campaign to do this. And of course, now what's Blinken doing? Blinken is now our Secretary of State, flying around the world, for all we know, getting us into more wars, flying around in his jet that's producing more carbon in an hour than most of us make in a year. So the story goes on and on and on and on. I keep waiting for a dead end in one of these investigations, and I haven't found a dead end yet.
It's like an onion. You keep on peeling away. There's layer after layer of corruption laid down by your opposition party, the Democrats. So this is where I'm going with this. You got Lois Lerner, who was found to have lied before Congress. She illegally targeted conservatives. She retires with a full pension. You've got Javier Becerra, who's been found by the Inspector General to have violated the Hatch Act. He's in violation of the law. You've got Barack Obama implicated in his White House in this Russia collusion hoax. And the list is just going on and on and on of Democrats who have been accused or have been found guilty of doing some pretty shady stuff and illegal stuff, yet they never seem to meet justice. Senator, doesn't this dual system of justice, in the spirit of your father, doesn't it have to end?
It has to. But here's the frustration. America gave us Joe Biden in the White House. They gave Chuck Schumer the gavel in the Senate. So this is the America that we live in. How did that ever happen? You know, thank God that we got Jim Jordan over on the House side leading the charge over there. But we need a Senate majority of Republicans to be able to do anything with this. So what they get done over there, it tends to stop. This is why we dropped a resolution of no confidence in Secretary Mayorkas. Do you know anybody in the community of Dallas that would look me in the eye and say our border's secure? He's charged with securing the border, but we have 300 Americans dying every day from fentanyl poisoning alone.
Yeah, and let's go on with Mayorkas, because the Republican Party seems to have targeted him, and rightly so. He is only following Joe Biden's orders, but still, the level of malfeasance, and he gets up in front of Congress and he filibusters and he tells blatant falsehoods. How successful do you think the Republicans will be in impeaching Alejandro Mayorkas?
Well, I spoke with Dr. Mark Green just this morning, who's leading that charge over on the House side to get those articles of impeachment drawn up. I think that our resolution of no confidence in him gives him some support, some cover, so to speak, to go forward with that. You know, here's the tough thing. You wake up in the morning, you're in the House, you're in the Senate. We've got inflation up, what, 15, 20% since Joe Biden took over. The biggest problems Americans have is the cost of gas, the cost of groceries, and we're worried about the safety and security of our families. I kid you not. I was with a group of 8 senators Monday night making a plan for the week. The last conversation we had is bear spray legal in Washington, D.C. to give to our staff? So we're trying to just put out the fires, one crisis after another, and here's an impeachment trial that needs to happen. But to your point, Secretary Mayorkas is carrying out the orders of Joe Biden. Joe Biden wants an open border. He's willing to sacrifice 300 Americans a day in order to fill his blue states with more people in hopes that when the next census comes out, they'll get more electoral college votes in those states as well as more House seats.
Last question I have for you is on the debt ceiling negotiation.
Yeah.
The way this is being framed, and you got to give the House Republicans and Speaker McCarthy a lot of credit for this. They have said we put together a bipartisan proposal,
You bet.
$1.5 trillion increase in the debt ceiling, which is good, and we're also putting in structural cuts to basically stop this rampant, uncontrolled spending. Now, Joe Biden has said he refuses to negotiate. The Constitution of the United States is quite clear. Spending originates in the House of Representatives. Do you think the Republicans, and the reason I'm asking this, Senator, is because you've got an ideological divide among Republicans inside of the U.S. Senate. You've got a lot of do-nothing Republicans in the United States Senate. You've got some good, strong conservatives like yourself inside of the United States Senate. Will the Republican Party unite to say to Joe Biden, if you decide you want to ignore the constitutional responsibility the House has to control the purse strings, that's fine. But if you don't want to acknowledge the Constitution, that's on you, Joe Biden. If you want to sacrifice the full faith and credit of the United States, that's going to be Joe Biden's decision if he doesn't want to come to the table. Do you think the Republicans will be united in that message? Yes,
hell yes. We've got to be. You know, the future of our children, my 4 grandchildren's at stake. Last night, flying in, one of my very best friends, the budget chairman from the House, Congressman Jody Arrington, was with me on a 3-hour flight delay. So we got caught up. We'd visited a couple weeks ago about this same question. He said, you got the kahunas over on your side of the Senate to stand up to what we're doing. I want to just praise what Jody's done, as well as the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. They're doing an incredible job to make as much progress as they have. To your point, Joe Biden wants a second credit card. He's maxed out his credit card. If your child came to you, your teenager, said, Dad, Mom, thanks for the credit card. I maxed it out. Can I have another one? What would you tell him? No. Why don't you think about go getting a job? We have 7 million able-bodied, healthy American men between the ages of 25 and 45 that aren't working right now. Let's get those people back to work. Let's balance the budget. So I think what Speaker McCarthy, what Jody Arrington have done, a credible job. I'm going to do everything I can to put wind beneath their sails.
Senator,